Now this video is going to deal with variation within a species, and it's part of our inheritance and genetics topic, which is key area 2.5. So when we talk about variation, what we're meaning is differences that occur between members of a species, and variation can be seen in animals and in plants, and I've just put two examples that are here. So over at this side here we've got ladybirds, and you can see that there's a variation in the number of spots on the ladybirds and in the colouring. Or on the other side here we've got a type of flower, and you'll see that there's variation in the colouring. In humans there's all sorts of variation: eye colour, hair colour, skin colour, heights, and so on. So types of variation just in a moment, but just a little reminder that in fertilisation genes from each parent are passed on to the offspring, and so that creates an organism that is different from other members of the species, even different from the parents, because you're inheriting different genes from these two different parents, and these genes are coming together to produce an individual. So sexual reproduction is what contributes to variation within a species. You're not producing clones, identical copies. What you're doing is you're combining the genes of these two parents and producing a unique individual. So the types of variation, well, there are two types, and the first one that we're going to look at is this one here called discrete. Sometimes it's referred to as discontinuous variation. And that's where you've got some kind of characteristic that falls into distinct groups. An example of that would be the ABO human blood group system. So every single individual either falls into a category where they've got an A blood group or a B blood group or an AB or an O, and you will fit into one of these. There's not anything in between. There's not a sort of a kind of C in there or something, or when I'm saying in between, there's not a kind of shade of the idea of some other blood group that's in there. You're either blood group A, or your blood group B, or your blood group AB, or your blood group O. There's not any other categories. And of discrete variation. Earlobes, you can have either attached earlobes, like the situation here, or unattached earlobes. So it's either one or the other. Or you are a tongue roller, so you can either roll your tongue or you can't roll your tongue. And another example over here is like a widow's peak, this here. And so when we're talking about discrete variation, it's always examples of things that fall into categories or groups. Type of variation is this variation here, and it's called continuous variation. And that's where some kind of characteristic has a range in the values. So an example of that would be heights in humans. You don't have a human that is 4 foot, or a human that is 5 foot, or a human that's 6 foot. It doesn't fall into categories like that every human that is born is either 4 feet tall or 5 feet tall or 6 feet tall. There's a whole wide range within there. And humans can have a range of heights. So other sort of examples of continuous variation would be handspan, so how wide your handspan is, the length of maybe your index finger, or if you're looking at other organisms, maybe the length of a fish or the length of its fin. All these kind of things would be examples of continuous variation where it falls over a range. So on this slide here, as to whether something, a list of characteristics, some found in plants and some found in animals or cattle or in humans. And what I want you to do is decide whether you think it's discrete or continuous variation. So before you move on to the slide, pause this one and you have a go and see which ones you think fall into which category. When you finish that, you can move on to the next slide, and on that slide it tells you, or it's got together in a table, which categories or what category each of these things fall into. So here's the table here of discrete variation on the one side and continuous variation on the other side, examples. And you can pause this and check that you got your answers right just a moment ago. Now, when it comes to presenting data for these types of variation, there's different ways that each of them are represented. When you're looking at a discrete variable, that is something that falls into groups, it's normally presented as a bar graph. And you're quite familiar with bar graphs. Every single group is just represented by one bar. And you'll see here, it's saying here the percentage of the population. It's not a very good or accurate graph, this, to work out what it's saying, but percentage population with blood group A is somewhere just above 40%, between 40% and 45%. You'll see that the most common blood group is O, the least common blood group is AB. So that's the bar graph, and usually when we do a bar graph we do leave spaces between the bars. Sometimes you don't have to do that, but it's just kind of generally good practice to have it. Continuous variation represented. Well, it's represented in something that's called a histogram. And that's where a range of characteristics are divided into subsets or into groups. And what we'll do is we'll have a look at how that works in class. So what happens is what happens is you're plotting a whole lot of bars all together, and what happens is you find if you've taken a population of people and you've looked at their heights, you will find that not all that many of them are the shorter height and not all that many of them are very tall, but you'll get a whole lot of ones that fall in the middle category here. So what happens is when these plots or these bars are all plotted out, you can join them with this line here, and that's a kind of continuous line, and it shows that you've got a wide range of different heights that are there. Most people will have a height somewhere close in the centre here, and as I said, you'd have fewer shorter or taller people here. There's no spaces between bars, but we'll look at how these subsets are put together when we're in class. Now, there's one type of inheritance I want to talk about, and that is inheritance that's called polygenic inheritance. Now, most characteristics shown by plants and animals show polygenic inheritance. Now, what we mean by polygenic inheritance is that there's many genes that act to control the characteristic, and so what we're talking about here are things that have got continuous variation. So polygenic characteristics, there's a number of genes that are there, and examples of that include height, weight, skin colour, and hand span in humans. It's not just one gene that's responsible for it, there's a number of genes. It tends to be when you're looking at discrete variation, you're looking at there's maybe only one gene that's involved. So I've made sure that you've got a note about this to understand what polygenic inheritance is. You don't really need to know any more information about it, but it's just so that you're familiar with the term.